at STEM Fellowship. I am a third-year biology major here at SFU. My research experience here has been in the GREE's chemical ecology labs. So I volunteered there, I've done paid research, and currently I'm doing a personal course credit project. So I have lots of experience in undergraduate research. I'll be giving this presentation today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about it. All right. So first of all, just the basics, some terminology. So first of all, you'll have your principal investigator. So this is the head of the lab. Typically, this is a professor. They oversee all student researchers and projects. So all lab members will report to this individual on a regular basis. Your PI will also be the main person marking your project if you're doing a research course. So now this is different from a supervisor. So this person is your main point of contact and the person you'll report to as an undergrad. So this is typically a graduate student or a postdoctoral student, like a postdoc. And this person will be more hands-on in running your project or their specific project. And as an undergraduate researcher, again, you'll report to this person. All right, so getting started in research. So reaching out to your professors is one of the best ways to get involved. Professor research interests, if they're doing research at SFU, will be on their faculty information page. And we also recommend talking to your TAs. So if you get along well and you work hard during your tutorial, they're more likely to want to help you or work with you to find a project. For some upper division courses, professors may pull top students from their labs as well. So my PI is Gerhard Gries. He runs the insect biology course BISC 317. And for sometimes he will pull his top lab students from that class and ask them to join his lab. So that's actually how my supervisor got started in that course, or in his lab, is that he did really well in the insect biology course and then he got an invitation from there. So that's not quite as common, but it does happen. So it's a good thing to keep in mind when you're choosing courses and when you're working in lab courses. So you can also look into your department's research opportunities page for projects seeking undergrads. So sometimes graduate students will post if they need volunteers or if they're seeking help, and just a brief blurb about their project. And that can be a good way to get started as well. So there's also lots of co-op research opportunities. So this is a really great way to gain technical experience and to make connections in the field. So another way you can do it is joining your student union and being an active member of your student union. So lots of SUs often get the first notice about opportunities within the department, and sometimes they'll share them with the active members of their group. And then also some graduate students will reach directly to the student union to look for help as well. If they recently graduated and they kind of know people in the student union, they'll do that. So we've got our types of research. So I'm going to talk about 4 main types. So first we have course credit research. So in biology, BPK, chemistry, computer science, earth science, engineering science, environmental sciences, health science, and math, all of them have some form of course credit research or honors program available. So a course credit research program will require supervision from a faculty member, and they're treated as a full course. So for 200 level or 400 level research programs, you'll be dedicating 6, 12, under 20 hours a week in the lab or doing lab work at home, and you will get graded for this. This does go towards your GPA, and it's just seen as a project that you do in the lab. So this kind of connects to course credit research, but you can also do an honors program. So honors programs are full-time, typically for 1 semester, and students defend a thesis to a committee at the end of the semester's research. So this is full-time. This counts as, I think, 13 to 15 credits, depending on what your program is. And this is a pretty intense type of research, but you also will graduate with honors if you meet the other requirements of the program. So the third kind I'm going to talk about is paid research. So SFU offers NSERC grants in STEM to undergrads who do 1 semester of research in the lab. So the NSERC grant it's called an NSERC USRA. So this stands for Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and the USRA is an undergraduate student research award. So this is treated as a full-time job, basically. And the constraints of this position will depend on the lab and the supervisor, but basically you'll be up at SFU 5 days a week doing lab research, assisting, doing your own project. It kind of depends, but that's a great way to make some money and to continue your research while you're at SFU. Paid research can also be done under a co-op position. So SFU's labs take co-op students for research semesters, as do many companies. And this is a great way to gain connections in your field and at SFU. And so fourth and final is volunteer work. So sometimes this can be a little boring, but it's usually the way that students get started doing research. PIs will often want to see your work ethic and attitude before offering you paid or course work. And lots of grads need people to do grunt work, as it's called. So things like autoclaving, cleaning, feeding, and data analysis. These will be really important, especially for the wet labs at SFU. So personally, my research has spanned course credit, paid research, and volunteer work in the GREES lab. And I'm happy to answer your questions about this if you send me an email or ask after the event. All right, so what to expect? So as I said before, lots of students start with volunteer work and therefore you will do grunt work, but you should be using this as a time to form connections with graduate students and show off your work ethic. So you also want to be really confident. So no one starts research knowing everything. If you're early in your degree and have little or no technical experience, that's okay, but it's important to show off that you're a hard worker and that you're ready and willing to be there all the time. And so the third thing we recommend is asking questions. So be informed about your research area of study, make the most of this learning opportunity. Even if it doesn't become a long-term interest or you don't end up sticking around, it's a great experience to have that extra knowledge and the technical experience. So what can you do with your research experience? So first of all, there's grad studies. So grad school in STEM is mostly research. So having experience in labs is a helpful experience that will carry you into your grad research. And then as I mentioned before, the honors program, it's a great way to add to your degree. Of course, there's lots of careers in research. There's opportunities for technicians and researchers in STEM. And of course, professional schools. So that's what a lot of people here, I'm sure, are thinking about. So if your plan is medical, dental, veterinary, or pharmacy school, having research looks great on your application and also helps to bolster your knowledge base. All right, so why can research experience be valuable? Oops, no. Okay, so research experience is a great way to gauge your interest if you're unsure of your field of study. It's a great way to build your resume. It looks good to future employers, especially if your technical skills carry over. And it can be helpful for full-time positions in the future. It helps you to gain experience in your field of interest, and networking and making connections is super important for that. All right, so your next steps, so you've got your research position, you've done some research on your own. You can do some publishing as well. So at SFU, we have the SURGE, which is the Student Undergraduate Research Journal, which accepts submissions from SFU students who have done research and written about it. And then as STEM Fellowship, the national chapter has the STEM Fellowship Journal, so the SFJ, and that's also the same thing. So you can submit your research to them if you've done research as an undergrad. And we also have conferences. So SFU has a poster competition for research presentations. Many other opportunities will present and even compete using your research will come up. So this opportunity will be a little bit later down the road, but keep your eyes open when you start to be more involved in your research and you're kind of figuring everything out. All right. So now we have our panel. I think I'll hand it back over to Ramneet.
Yeah, so we've got our panel. So we've got Kevin Ray and Omid Vakili. So maybe Kevin, would you like to start by introducing yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, guys. So I am a PhD student in my last few months of my degree in Jonathan Choi's lab in MBB at SFU. I also did my undergrad at SFU, and it's changed a lot over the years, and I'm really glad to be here. I research how the bacteria in our gut influences the immune system and how that changes transplant rejection. I work with mice. I also do some bioinformatics stuff in the past year. Um, and yeah, I'm happy to ask or answer questions and discuss with you guys in the Q&A portion.
Alrighty, and then our second panelist is Omid. Would you mind introducing yourself and what your research is?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, thank you all so much for having me here. My name is Omid, and I'm in my second year of master's. So I started my master program last year in the beginning of pandemic. But I also did my undergrad here at SFU. I was in the BPK department. I did my undergrad in biomedical physiology. And then throughout my undergrad, like I did, as Megan mentioned, like I took opportunity of a lot of these kind of like getting to work in the lab and getting to know the research a bit, and kind of like brought me to the field that I'm researching now. So I'm in the injury prevention lab in the BPK department, working with Dr. Steve Rabinovich. My research is working on hockey project, which is specifically looking at how does the glass or the shielding in hockey affects head impact severity of the hockey players. And yeah, I would be happy to answer any of you guys' questions.
Awesome. So now basically it's time for Q&A. So anyone that is here, you can put your questions either into the chat. If you'd like, you can just turn on your mic and ask them. You can ask specific questions to a specific panelist if you're more interested in their research, or just general questions as well. And yes, I guess now we just wait for questions.
Hi there. I have a question for Kevin.
Hi.
Hi, Kevin. I just wanted to know, so like your journey from your undergrad to your PhD. So I'm doing my bachelor's right now in the life sciences, health sciences field. And if I want to step into PhD in the future, what are the steps that I need to take?
Right, absolutely. So great question. And I guess one of the most important things, I think, is the first step is to decide whether or not you want to do a PhD. And that is a big, big question. I think it should be the most difficult question, most difficult thing to resolve in all of this, because just for completion's sake, and if not everybody's familiar, at many institutions, you don't have to do a master's degree before you do a PhD. SFU has it where if your undergrad GPA is above, I don't know, it's like 3.5 or something, you can be admitted directly into the PhD program. My GPA was significantly lower than that. So I started as a master's student, and then after a couple of years, you can switch directly into a PhD, and then you take what's called a comprehensive exam, which is kind of your admissions test into a PhD program. All PhD candidates have to do that. That's something very specific. But what that means essentially is that you can jump into it right away if you know that that's what you want to do. But of course, a PhD is between nowadays really like 5 to 6 years, and that's a long time to be spending in research under the circumstances that your lab is in. It depends on what your project is like. It depends on what your funding is like from the lab. And the experiences can be pretty varied. So I would really make sure that leading research as a PhD student is what you want to do first. But then depends on the institution. So you need your bachelor's degree, obviously. You need to graduate and have your different qualifications. Depending on the programs, it does better if you have an honors, but I didn't have an honors. I did 3 terms of co-op, so I had a co-op certificate. But a lot of supervisors at SFU will recruit from their honor students, their volunteers, or they'll advertise in their 4th year courses if there's students that they think are particularly strong, and then they'll start you in a trial basis. And then if you do okay, then you can think about applying to grad school. Other universities, you have to apply to their whole department, and then you do a rotation between the labs. Typically, that kind of a program is harder to get into at first because you need to meet certain depersonalized requirements like your GPA and your CV and all that. And then the pool of graduate students gets shifted around the labs, which for a month, 2 weeks or something. And then PIs rank which student they want, and then the students rank which lab they want. And yeah, so the benefit of that is that you get lots of different experiences depending on the work environment. The downside is that you might not have as much control, and PIs might not have as much control there. But at SFU, it's very directed. You can go up to a supervisor, and if they need a graduate student, and you can talk to them about it. And if they say, like, yep, I will take you on if you apply, and then you apply, and as long as you make the minimum requirements, you get in. So that part's not too onerous, but I would really caution people about really thinking through whether or not they want to do a PhD. I think on a whole, people perform more, I guess I should say more consistently or more comfortably in research if they've done a master's degree first. It means that you're starting your PhD later, you're older and more mature. You also know if you want to stay in research. If you do a master's degree and you're still excited about research, then that's probably a pretty good indication. But sometimes going into a PhD, like fourth, fifth year, the commitment really starts to get to you. And it's good to be able to go back to your initial decision, be like, yes, I definitely know exactly why I want to be here, versus like, oh, I didn't really know where I wanted to go, and grad school seemed cool. And now I really, yeah. You're working for all that time for less than minimum wage. So honestly, there's a lot of very practical considerations that I would really encourage everybody to think about. I don't regret my decision. It was hard. It is hard still, but I don't regret my decision. I just thought I'd put that out there.
Okay, so you did 3 years of master's and then 5 years of PhD?
No, so I didn't even do what was my 3 years of master's. It was counted towards my PhD. So I've been in graduate school since fall 2014. It's been a while. COVID really messed me up last year. For working with mice is not very easy. But yeah. And sometimes what you can do is you can leave research early if you enter as a master's student and you decide that, no, I can't, I need to make more money than this. I need to move. My spouse had a great opportunity across the country or something, or my family needs me to be in a certain place, then you can talk with your supervisor and you can graduate with a master's degree. After you've transferred to PhD, that's harder to do. It's possible, but it's very rare that someone wouldn't finish their PhD once you're there. There's a lot of momentum that gets going.
But
Yeah.
if you have your PhD, you can also work as a prof at SFU, right?
Yes, that is true. That is theoretically true one day, that you might be able to work as a professor somewhere. One thing that Megan brought up is this idea of postdoctoral fellows, and maybe, sorry, Omid, I'm doing a lot of talking, but do you mind if I just explain like kind of the structure of academia a bit?
Oh no, yeah, go ahead. It is very confusing looking at it from undergrad perspective. You're doing a great job.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I just didn't want to take up all the airtime, but I'll go ahead and explain then. So if you think about it as a progression, which is kind of the case, you go from your undergrad degree to your master's degree, and sometimes you can skip that step, and then your PhD. At the PhD level, you get the title of doctor and you can lead your own research projects. As a master's graduate, you are a capable scientist. You have practical skills, you know the structure of research, and you are every bit as smart as a PhD student. There is no distinguishable difference in intelligence between someone that stops at a master's and stops at a PhD. I actually think that if you continue to a PhD, you might not be that smart because it's a lot more work. But after a PhD, you can do what's called a postdoctoral fellowship. And so rather than being a student, you are a kind of a pseudo staff person that gets employed by an organization. So BC Cancer has their own staff scientists that are postdocs, or by a lab, or you can get your own funding through scholarships. So there's funding organizations like NSERC, like Megan was talking about, and you can do research without any of the degree requirements. There's no more courses, you don't have a TA, and you just do that full time. And typically, people have done a postdoc and it's really intensely one project, and the goal is to publish really well with that time. So you find a nice big reputable lab where they do awesome research. You work super freaking hard. You don't make much money. Postdocs in Canada, I think, are paid between 50 and 60 grand a year, which is really bad for having a PhD. That might be changing because of like, it's understandable that some people just can't take the financial hit. You've sacrificed so much of your income during your PhD, you can't really continue on as a postdoc. After you've done your postdoc, then you can, or while you're in it, you can start to apply to faculty positions. Nowadays, what it looks like is you probably need to do between 6 and 10 years of a postdoc in order to get enough publications and enough research clout to be hired by an institution to be a professor. So that's a long time. So that's your undergrad. That's a master's degree, maybe. That's your PhD. So after your undergrad, that's like, let's say fast master's degree, so that's 2 years. Fast PhD, that's 4 years, so that's 6. Postdoc, you kill it. You're awesome. 5 years. So 6, 5, that is 11 years after you finish your undergrad, you can apply to these things. I know that a lot of professors, like talk to any of your instructors, and they'll tell you just how much they've had to apply. My professor applied to 30 institutions, got 1 interview, and by some miracle, he says it himself, he's a very smart guy and deserves it. But he was hired by SFU. It was a strategic hire. His research is awesome and it's important to have here. But there are lots of people who apply for years. So that's like that'd be the dream. I love the idea of being able to do more research and mentor people and instruct the next generation, but also that's a lot of work and it's a really long time. So
basically becoming a prof at SFU is not so easy.
No, definitely not. But what's really cool is that every now and then universities will have like a hiring, do I want to say rush opportunities in different subject areas. And then there's funding that becomes available in that time. So for example, in the past 3 years, MBB has hired like 4 or 5 professors. And one thing that'll happen, I think you guys will probably be kind of right about the right time. The generation before us, I don't know if I can count myself in your guys' generation though. There's a lot of people who are going to retire. There's no mandatory retirement for professors, as far as I understand. It depends on institution to institution, but a lot of people are going to retire. There's going to be a big turnaround. And there may be better opportunities in the future. There may be new universities founded. Like, for example, apparently SFU is getting a medical school. According to the provincial government, they're going to need professors and educators for that. So there will be opportunities. There will always be opportunities. But I think ending up at a specific university with a specific position, I think that is, that's unlikely. And if you want to shoot your shot, go for it. But also be strategic about how you spend your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're
So
welcome.
we just have some questions in the chat.
Sorry, that was a little bit ranty.
That's okay, no worries. So I just got a question. What year in my undergrad did I start and how did I start? So I started last year, so I was second year. I basically just emailed a bunch of professors in biology and asked if they needed volunteers, and I eventually got into that. And yeah, I've just continued looking for opportunities since then. So another question in the chat. So this is for Kevin and Omid. What interested you about doing research and why did you choose to do research, PhD, master's?
Why don't you go ahead and take this one, Omid?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. And also kind of like adding on to the last question, Megan, like I was also like similar route. So like in my second year, I was interested in like doing volunteering in lab. So it's like it's pretty easy to just get in contact with your professors that you're working with, or not even like the ones that you haven't taken courses with. So like in my second year, I like sent an email to one of the profs in my department saying that I was interested in volunteering in the lab, like, and he was super nice, and like we were able to like put that together, and I was able to like volunteer in that lab for like 2 years on and off. But then I realized quickly that like that kind of research wasn't what I was really interested in. It was super cool research. They were working with like cardiac molecular cells. They had like beating heart cells in the dish, which was super cool.
That's Glenn's
I
lab,
just
right?
realized, yeah, Glenn Tibbet's lab.
Cool.
Yeah. But then I realized that wasn't for me. And like during the same time in second year, I was taking like biomechanic courses, and that was like more on the engineering side of kind of like what my program was in. So there I became really interested in biomechanics. I decided that I was going to do a directed studies. So it's kind of like a credit-based course with a prof. So I reached out to one of the profs that I took the course with, and then I did 2 semesters of directed studies. That's kind of like 8 months. And then right after that, I decided that that was kind of like toward the end of my undergrad. Then I decided that I would want to pursue master's in the similar field in biomechanics. So I just end up applying for the same lab.
Sure. Kevin, did you have anything to add about what interested you in your research and why you chose to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the things that are important to me, and that's something that's come up a lot in getting advice from people that I've when I've gotten advice is that everybody has their own set of priorities, and the only advice that they can really provide, well, I mean, they'll describe how they made their decisions based on their own priorities. So if you have different priorities than me or whoever else, then you'll need to do a little bit of adjusting. But I really loved the idea of having a built-in progression into the work that I did. I like the idea of things evolving and learning different skills and constantly having to pivot. I also just have been really interested in science since I was a kid. You guys might be too young, but if you remember a show called Bill Nye the Science Guy, like when it was originally airing on TV, just that was my jam. And it didn't really stop after that. I've also been kind of a bad student, though. I didn't. Somebody else was saying low GPA earlier. I'm right there with you. One of my colleagues that I really respect, his GPA was lower than 3, and he won over the course of his PhD. He won over $90,000 worth of scholarships, nationally respected, published many times, and is working now a great job at a biotech company with his PhD. So just as an aside, I pursued research even though my grades weren't that good. And from what I've seen, it doesn't necessarily hold you back very much. Medical school, though, that's another mountain to climb with something like that.
For sure. Okay, so we have another question in the chat. So you mentioned volunteer work as a good start. What are the steps to find volunteer work, and how do you recommend reaching out if you don't have much research experience prior? So when I started doing my research, I was just at the end of my second year. I had no experience in the lab other than taking Chem 121 and like BPK 142, like not even really lab experience, just coursework experience. So really what it was asking around frequently, being persistent, and just waiting for that opportunity to come, because sometimes labs just simply don't have the space or the need for volunteers. But you shouldn't be worried about not having that experience. I know it can be like a little scary to just go into a lab and have no idea what's happening, but they know that. That's kind of why they need people. So it's okay if you don't know how to do everything. That's all right. Like, you shouldn't let that hold you back from asking. Omid, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's like basically what like the volunteer position that I first started with. Like, yeah, I emailed the prof. Like, it took a while for him to respond, but actually, like, you can also just like, well, back when there was no pandemic, I just went up to like the office of the prof and like asked them to, and like, luckily it was in the office. Like, we start talking, and but yeah, it's like don't feel afraid to like just reach out. They know that like you're an undergrad student, that you don't have a lot of lab experience, so they know like what kind of student they're going to be getting in the lab. And the PhD and the master students that I worked with, they were super nice. They love to help. They want to like teach me things. So that was definitely really cool.
Okay. So Kevin had kind of answered about GPA being a little lower than 3, but I think he kind of went over that a little already.
I
So
think the reality, sorry, I'll just tack on one thing. I didn't mean to interrupt. The one thing is that unfortunately there are some scholarships that will be difficult or impossible to get because of your GPA. So there are unfortunately consequences, but it's also just as true that your GPA does not equal your intelligence. There are people who have gotten, like I've known people who have gotten 4.3 GPA and they are incredibly intelligent. I've also met people at around that range where as soon as you go off the tracks of conversation, it gets really difficult. But the hard work that you put into a GPA will advocate for you. If you are in a position where you've been able to really hunker down, you've built up the skills through high school or through people that have supported you, then that's amazing. That'll advocate for you. If you've not been in a situation where that's happened, you can still advocate for yourself with your own enthusiasm. Just talk to people if you really love. The best thing that would happen, for example, is that you take a fourth year course that you're genuinely interested in. And despite the fact that it's hard, you do better than average or better than your average. And then you can talk to that prof and you can say, hey, look, I really liked your course. I liked it so much that I was able to change this thing a little bit. And then you just talk to them about it and then it'll come across. And then that might be the way that you find your way in. But yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, and kind of like adding in to Kevin's, like my GPA was also not great at all, and it's like that's what I was really worried about when I was applying for masters. But then something that you could do is like if you have that kind of like experience and you have that background working, especially with that lab that you're applying for, that really helps you because you're going to have a prof or instructor that's going to be advocating for you because when they're reviewing the applications, they already know that this person, the student who's applied, they already have a supervisor that they're willing to take them up. So that really helps as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Okay.
had a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of towards Omid and Kevin, in terms of like, I guess I'm just kind of wondering to you guys each personally, when did you like kind of realize that you wanted to pursue research? And like, what were like the things that kind of took you to make like kind of reach out and take that step to do that?
That's a really good question. I think I explained a little bit in that I'd been enthusiastic about science in general for a long time. And so I always wanted to try some things that I was curious about. And research just seemed like a really natural way of doing that. But the flip side of that is that even when you're in research and it's something that you love, you'll still have to recommit to it over and over again. There's lots of menial stuff. There's constant delayed gratification. For example, when you submit a publication, you've got this body of work. It looks great. You've thought of everything. When you submit a publication, there's always a chance that it can get rejected. They can ask for revisions, and then the revisions take a long time. And it's kind of like 6 to 8 months between submitting a publication and it being accepted, let alone published. So you have this exercise of constantly waiting longer and longer and longer for your investment of time and energy to pay off. So you really need to have a habit of recommitting to it. So sure, there's a moment where you start to try, but constantly committing to it over and over again is also a part of the process. So I just wanted to make that clear because it's like, yeah, I want to do this. And then the novelty wears off. And that's just normal. That doesn't mean research is bad, but that's just a thing, right? I think if you look at your hobbies or your degree or a job that you've had, and you've had to like really stick it through when it's gotten difficult. Sports is great for this because you have to train really hard and sometimes it's uncomfortable, or even other hobbies that aren't academically worthwhile. This is probably something that you've already done. It's just for research, you're going to have to do the same thing. And I just want to be really transparent about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like exactly like Kevin said, like it might sound like all fun, like doing research and like it's all going to be like you're going to be finding a lot of things and like research is super fun, but like you're going to run into a lot of problems. There's going to be more setbacks in your degree as a researcher than like how much progress you're going to end up making. And that's what makes what research is. And to kind of like add on to Brandon's question, so like what made me interested that want to like pursue masters, like as I said, like I became really interested about this super specific part of what I was studying. But then I realized there's not a lot of courses, or there's not a lot of really mainstream like textbooks and things like that explains this like thing that I'm interested in. There wasn't a lot of, I didn't know what to do after undergrad with like the undergraduate degree that I had, because that wasn't getting me where I want to go. So that's why I decided to kind of like pursue a master degree where I was bringing in this other stuff that I was interested in, like physics and engineering, and combining it with like physiology background that I had, and kind of like making my own degree, sort of.
Okay, so the next question I've got here in the chat, what kind of skills, qualities do you think are helpful or essential for a career in research? So I can answer this a little bit. Perseverance and grit are some of the most important things that will get you through doing research. In my project right now, I've been running into some issues with making my experiment work. And it's been really tough. Like
Congratulations. That's the true research experience.
Yeah, I spent the entire month of November and into December working on this experimental design, and it's still kind of, it's iffy. And like persevering through that and being able to work through that and not letting it stop me or think that this is a useless project, that's been one of the most important things. It's not because I'm brilliant, or it's not because I can stay up all night and work all day and work every day. It's because I can persevere through the difficult things, and that's what's really been essential. If either of you would like to answer, I'm sure you'd say the similar things, but if you have any other answers, I'd love to hear them.
I've heard it described that science is like 90% troubleshooting, and I think that percentage might be a little bit low. Honestly, what you're describing, Megan, is so endemic to the lab experience. I think literally our job in research is to do something that's never been done before by anyone else. Of course, we're going to run into problems. You can be the smartest person ever, and you're going to hit a brick wall every month, every year, absolutely every year if you're doing anything meaningfully. Yeah. And being able to rethink a situation, being able to be patient with yourself before trying again. I think that a lot of times, or there've been some times where I've really just wanted to plow through a problem, so I kept trying it over and over and over again. But really what I needed to know was something that I could only figure out for myself when I stopped, did a lot of reading, talked to my professor about it, and kind of let things percolate for a while. And so the ability to stop and think things through is just as important as working hard. I think that you can have a successful career in research only working 40 hours a week, but you need to be focused. Yeah, prioritizing. That's the other thing that I wanted to say. There are absolutely things that are more important and less important. And sometimes that means that you're not going to please everybody with everything that they need from you. And you'll have to kind of figure out how you want to balance that. But yeah. Troubleshooting, prioritization.
Yeah, I think Megan and Kevin did a great job summing everything up in grad school. Yeah, I think like kind of like add on to that, it's like really you hear it all the time, like in grad school, that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Like you really have to, like once you get into it, you need to like pace yourself out. Like you need to like make sure that like that you know that the research that you're doing, you're gonna have a lot of setbacks. Like you're gonna build like perseverance, like going through all the troubles that you're going to be fixing through it, and it's going to be really, really fun. And it's like it's almost addicting to like when you come to a problem and you're finally able to solve it. But then it's like you also need to know that like the reason why it's so fun is because you don't get to do it that often. When you do make that breakthrough, it's really, really fun for you and like the whole lab. But yeah, and like kind of like adding on, like I'm not sure if the person asking that question was more looking for like specific skills or qualities. I'm not really sure if this is very applicable to a lot of labs, but like what I noticed like in some of the undergrad degrees at SFU, like you don't really learn a lot about like doing like coding or like mathematical stuff and like doing stats and things like that. And something that I learned pretty quickly in doing directed studies and doing my graduate work is that you really need to know a lot of, or not a lot of coding, but like you need to know, to have some knowledge of like working with computer and like being really good at like doing stats, because that's what it comes down to it sometimes, is that like you need to kind of like run a bunch of statistical analysis to be able to like tell the world what you've done, although it's not like not a very good method of doing it, but like that's what the science out there is still used to seeing.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll just keep going through the chat here. It looks like someone asked if any of us are from computer science. So I don't think any of us here are, but Ramneet is in computer science, I think. She hasn't done research, but I'm sure she could answer a question if you have it. But we can wait for that.
No, my question, to be honest with you, was like, since the people who have been speaking are mostly from bio background, so I just wanted to ask, is the same thing goes for applied sciences also? Because from my own experiences and talking to professors, I found that research there is very different. Like research is not that prestigious as compared to doing a co-op with companies. I just wanted to ask if somebody else has that experience or not here.
I think that's true. I haven't done any applied science stuff, but I have a few friends who have gone through engineering, et cetera. And that's definitely the focus in the Faculty of Applied Sciences. I think that
like I can tell you an anecdote. Yeah. One of the professors said to my mouth, don't do research. It wouldn't be as prestigious. Go for a co-op.
Sure. Yeah. I think working in a structured environment like a company is ultimately what a lot of people with an applied science degree, it's ultimately what they do. And so doing co-op will help you better in that area. You get a solid reference, you get paid, and you have to deal with a manager and all of your normal responsibilities. So I guess that would be more applicable. If it is something that you're interested in doing, it won't hurt. It just means that actually it's probably better to try it as an undergrad student, because then you're not sinking a whole master's degree into something you're just thinking about. Yeah, I think it's just a kind of an ideological difference between science and applied science.
That's true. I just wanted to learn about if there are any students who have done it, because since there are groups for science people to talk about how to get research and all, there isn't money resources for computer science or applied sciences to talk to and learn from seniors.
Oh, just sorry, there's a comment in the chat about expanding on that last bit. I just mean the co-op program where you can work for wherever, you get paid as a staff person, and you can take that towards a co-op degree. Is that, I think that you mentioned you were talking about that as a means to get research experience, Megan, but it's also possible to just work in a non-research setting, and that helps you out too.
Absolutely. So another comment in the chat, I've tried emailing profs asking for volunteer work, but never got a reply. TAs were also not helpful. So I'd say that right now it's really hard to find that kind of work, just because volunteers aren't allowed up at SFU at the moment. So any kind of volunteer work in a lab setting would be remote. So unfortunately, like it's a little hard to answer that, just because it's hard for everyone right now to find this kind of work. This would just kind of be general knowledge on how to do that. So hopefully if life is a little bit more back to normal soon, then those kind of opportunities will start to open up back up again. So we have a question in the chat from Kevin Lamb, and I assume this is Dr. Kevin Lamb from the biology department. Everybody, genetics, BISC 202 is a great class that I recommend from him. But he did say, when contacting professors, you don't know to ask for volunteer opportunities. What do you put in that first email? And students find this first contact really hard and scary. So definitely agreed. It's really hard, especially when you're not getting replies or you don't have very much experience. So my initial emails were, hello, professor, name. I am interested in volunteering in your lab. These are my backup, these are the tools that I have at my disposal. I have taken this course, I've done really well in this kind of course. I'm interested in the kind of research that you do. And I'd like to see if you'd be willing to have me as a volunteer in your lab. And so like when I first emailed Dr. Grease, I didn't get a response from him for like 3 months. So I just emailed him again and I said, hey, just to follow up, I'd like to see again if this is an opportunity that might be available. And by luck, I did eventually get a reply from him. So putting out a lot of feelers, following up if you don't get responses. These are very busy people who get tons and tons of emails from students. So helping yourself to stand out just a little bit in your email and just being persistent. And yeah, any tips from Kevin or Omid?
It's funny that Dr. Lam has asked that question, because that was when I was taking BISC 102, that was one of the reasons, because he was encouraging everyone to do this, to get involved with research. That was one of the reasons why I actually ended up emailing the prof that I was interested to volunteer with. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Lam, for like encouraging all undergrads. And I hope like a lot of you guys are like taking that opportunity. It's I know it can come across really difficult, be like, oh, I've never met this prof, like, why should I be emailing, things like that. But I think what in the first email I sent, I think I was just like, yeah, like as Megan said, like what courses I've taken, like, and a big part of it is like you want to also write why you're interested in their research. Like I know this can like be kind of difficult as an undergrad to go through their publications and like try to read up what kind of projects they have, but try your best to like kind of like figure out what kind of projects they're working on, especially in the last like 1 or 2 years, because the labs can go through like big changes and they could no longer be like working on the same project they were working in like 2008 or something. But like try to figure out like what is it about their research that makes you interested, and try to make sure to like put that in your email, so like they know that they're getting a volunteer that's going to be interested in their research. And this also goes saying like if you want to do directed studies with the prof, like try to like write in that email like why is it that you're interested in that area of research that they're working with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Omid hit the nail on the head. And because lab websites are notoriously out of date, a different way to get access to that kind of information would be to look for that lab's most recent publications. You can search the professor's name on something like NCBI or Google Scholar and just filter for most recent and double check that it's actually them. It'll say Simon Fraser University. If you don't know how to do that yet because you haven't taken your upper division courses where you've looked at primary literature, maybe it's a little bit too early to do that. I would really recommend people get a handle on some basic research skills that you just don't learn early on, and that's fine. You can just take your courses and it'll be provided to you. You'll have an opportunity to. But yeah, absolutely, like taking ownership of these ideas and like reflecting on them and then presenting what you think you would like to do. That is research ultimately. Then you keep doing that, and that's your career with some persistence and other things. One other thing that we haven't talked about, I think, and this is a reality at SFU and many different institutions, is that there are professors that keep a different culture in their lab, I guess I'll say, to be diplomatic. There's some professors who really do an excellent job of respecting their students and prioritizing their education and the mentorship of the people in their lab. And there are lots of those professors. SFU is great for that. There are also some professors that maybe don't put as high a priority on the mentorship of their undergrad students or their graduate students. And sometimes the culture in the lab reflects that, and it's maybe not quite as friendly or welcoming as you would expect it to be or want it to be. And sometimes in those environments, it is harder to get work done. You can spend more time, but if you're not thinking clearly because you're worried about what your boss is going to say, then like that's another challenge that you need to overcome. And it's kind of sad because it's like, as a supervisor, you would hope to provide all the resources that you need for the students to succeed as much as they can, because then it feeds back into your success, etc. But sometimes that's just not the case, and I don't want to pretend to understand why. And so one thing that I would really recommend before accepting anything longer than 4 months, really, so an honor semester, like you can kind of just grit your teeth and bear it. But whenever possible, talk to the people that have done studies in the lab or current graduate students, try to get them off record over Zoom or Skype so that things don't have to be written down. I'm just being super transparent about this because this is a really valuable skill. And talk about like, hey, do you feel supported in your lab? What is this person like as a supervisor? And if they say something like, well, they get really scary when they're mad, that sometimes is a cultural thing. And then sometimes it's a red flag. And then sometimes it's like, well, they hold us to a really high standard, but I also really appreciated how they helped me in this situation. And then you can kind of take and balance all that. I don't think that you'll ever find a lab where people don't work hard. But I think that you will find lots of labs where people are treated with respect consistently, and that is not an unreasonable thing to expect.
Absolutely. So back to some of the questions in the chat. Is it okay to do research with another faculty and not your own? Absolutely. Especially in STEM, there's a lot of crossover on what the professors will study. So absolutely, if you're interested in the research, you're more than welcome to go into another faculty and do research there. Another question, where or who do I ask for volunteer positions? Any professor at SFU who is running a lab or working in a lab and does research, I'd say is fair game. Some professors are just teaching professors or lecturers, so they won't be doing research typically. So you probably don't want to ask them, but I'm sure that you can just ask whoever you want, and the worst you're going to get is no reply or a no. So this is probably for Omid and Kevin. Does volunteer help to enroll in your master's if your GPA is less than 3.0?
I would say definitely yes. That would help with, especially if you're planning to do your master's in the same lab that you were volunteering in. Even not, like that would, it's still like having lab experience is a really good thing to have on your resume. Like even if you apply for other institution, that's definitely going to be really, really good. I think, and like we've been a lot of times here, we've been talking about volunteer work in the labs, like, but I just want to like go back to like what Megan was sharing in the beginning of the presentation, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be volunteer work. Like there's a lot of opportunity that you can do research and be involved with research, but for it to be count towards like your credits, or for it to be, you get paid for it and things like that. Like other than USRA, like a lot of labs do hire undergrad students throughout the year. Like the lab that I work in, like they constantly are hiring co-op students, even if they're not USRA. Like just keep that in your mind, that like it doesn't have to be volunteer research work, and it could be any kind of research work, and that would be still a really good thing to have on your resume to help you get into masters.
And just another thing about volunteering is that I would be really realistic with how much time that you can provide. Sometimes you're excited about something and you will spend disproportionate amount of time on it, and then it makes your life harder in other areas because you don't have as much time to do your courses or to hang out with family or whatever, which are all legitimately important things. Like this is a hopefully a sacrifice that comes out of excitement for what you're doing. But definitely don't feel like you have to give carte blanche to the professor that you're volunteering for, and then they might not know that you're taking 4 courses in volunteering, and they're like, oh, hey, can you come in 3 days a week to do these experiments because blah, blah, blah. It's really important to work out those boundaries as a volunteer, because ultimately you are sacrificing your time from other things, and that's valuable. Your time is valuable even as an undergrad. So just think about it. Think about how much time you could spare and what days, and work with a professor. They're super great. Honestly, if they want to take volunteers, they will understand that you are free. You are giving them free labor. And if you're like, I can only come in on 1 day a week or something, they might counter with like, well, there's this kind of experiment that I want you to do. You can't really do that in one day because of X step. What do you think about doing 2 days a week next to each other, but then you only do like 3 hours each day? Does that work? That kind of conversation happens all the time. It's really natural.
Absolutely. So another question from the chat, will there be more volunteer opportunities for research once classes go back to normal? I haven't seen any right now. So absolutely, yes. All the projects that are going on, a lot of them need volunteers, need undergrads. Like my professor and supervisor will say, the lab runs on undergraduate students. They do so much work for graduate projects for themselves, and they all contribute to the labs. So yes, volunteers will be needed for sure when classes are back to normal. It's a little bit of a tough time right now, of course, but yes, you will see those opportunities starting back up when we're all able to see each other again. Let's see. Okay, what year and or when do you think is a good time to start research? Whenever you want, as early as you want. Usually like first year, first semester is a little tough just because they want you to have a little bit more experience in the lab or in like the school, working in a university, studying at a university. But really any time, like is always a good time to start and to start making those connections and to cross things off that you're not interested in. Any other comments, Omid?
Actually, I started volunteering in first year, and that was hard because I didn't have any lab experience at that point. I mean, I had done this short thing in high school, but a lot of it was difficult for me to figure out. There weren't many other people in the lab, and I barely made any progress. And so for me, paradoxically, that was kind of demoralizing because I held myself up to the standards of what other people had done. And so I would just be really aware that like, depending on what you've learned beforehand, that kind of sets the reasonable expectation of what you can do. For example, I take, Omid, I think this is probably true for many graduate students. It takes way less time for me to read a paper in my field than it did at the beginning of my degree, right? So like you can probably read some biomechanics paper in 10 minutes and get a really good sense of what's going on and stuff. And then I could read one about immunology in, I've been doing graduate school for a little bit longer, so 9 minutes, 55 seconds. And then as an undergrad student, it would take you a day to go through the whole thing. I'm just approximating like for the very first time. And so the more that you learn, the easier it is for you to get going at certain things. So there is absolutely value in taking your lab courses. And in MBB, I think really you have to take 308 as your lab course before you can do useful things in the lab. That kind of sounds bad. Like you can learn the stuff hands-on, but I think a lot of professors are going to look at your courses and go, it's like, okay, well, I'm this person's super smart and they're really motivated. All right, so that's a pro. And they're going to work for free as a volunteer. That is a pro. But the con is I'm going to have to take time or someone's time to train them on cloning or running gels or, you know, doing this kind of thing, as well as tutoring them in the subject area. And so there's kind of this mental math that everybody does. And it'll be easier for people to invest time in you if you've taken more courses. But obviously getting started earlier, like Megan was saying, is appealing for a lot of reasons, because that means you can check things off. You can start to build those relationships. So depending on the faculty, I think that varies. But in MBB, I think after you've started to take your third year courses and where you can really get serious about it, you can start to talk to profs for fun in second year. Or if you're just super excited and want to get going right away, then go for it. But just don't be discouraged if people are like, talk to me after you've taken X course, and just go for it and try again.
Yeah, kind of like adding on to that. Yeah, like when I first started in that lab that I mentioned, it was like the grad students were super nice and everything, but like they would try to like explain me something, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is doing like this cardiac cell is doing this thing because of like this super specific physiological like phenomena that's happening. I was like, that's really cool, but like I didn't quite understand it. And like they were super nice. They would like try to invite me to their like they had like meetings for like paper reviews and things like that. But it's just like I had a really hard time, like as Kevin said, like keeping up with the literature. It was so difficult for me to start reading these kind of super specific literature without having that prior knowledge. And yeah, like that's something that you should keep in your mind as an undergrad. Like reading literature can be really difficult, but try to not get discouraged. It would take you a long time, and it would get easier and easier as you find your own niche of research and try to focus on that.
Absolutely. Okay, so another question here. Find professors, read up on their recent findings, see what you're interested in, and then email them asking to volunteer or just any position with research work. I asked if I could volunteer. I would stick with that, but if you are looking for coursework, you're probably going to want to go straight to a PI, not a grad student. As mentioned, with COVID restrictions, there aren't many opportunities. So what should we do? You're going to have to wait that out. There's nothing you can really do if they don't need anyone to do any kind of remote work. You can ask lots, like our lab. I think that we had, no, we haven't, sorry. We don't really have any volunteers working right now just because you're just not allowed to do that kind of thing. So it's a little tough right now, but that's just kind of what we have to work with. Assuming if
Dr. Lamb coming in
Just
clutch with the list.
yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of adding on to that, Megan, but that doesn't mean like you can still, like, you should still try to email the profs and the research that you're interested in. Like, you never know, because right now during pandemic, like a lot of PhD and master's students projects are pivoting because of this. So like part of my research has had to like switch to kind of like all computer modeling and things that I can do at home. So like there could be something for an undergrad to help out with that kind of project. And if you don't email, or like if you don't ask, you would never know. And kind of like in some labs, there's always been like some stuff that you could do online. Like in our lab, I think Gary has kind of like volunteered with like video analysis and things like that. And that's depending on type of research the lab is doing, there could definitely be parts that it could be done at home.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So someone asked if there's a list of specific lab courses. And so I think Kevin sent current research courses. If you go to the list of courses in your degree and just like Control F research, usually it's like a 290 something or a 490 something. Those will be your kind of research courses. They do require supervision from a faculty member. So that you're going to have to get in contact with them first, but that's how you would find what you could take in your degree.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you could probably contact your undergrad advisor too with health about this kind of thing, because I think that, well, we're certainly doing honors right now. We have an undergrad student in the lab, and then we have last term we had another undergrad student that was on a USRA. So there are different ways to get into research still. I think overall the number of opportunities are less, but if you can help brainstorm with a prof like how to get you into the lab, and then if it's a USRA, that's better than volunteering because it's paid, then that'll make it even more likely. But it is harder right now. The other option is to just go through your courses and maybe take more than you ordinarily would if you're not working, etc. It really depends on your own context. But then as soon as the restrictions are lowered, is that the right word? Then you'll be in a better position to do work in the lab. And then, like I said, that mental math about which people they want to invest in, that'll get it a little bit easier for you, because you'll know you'll have your fourth year courses done or some of them done in that subject area, etc.
Okay.
I had two questions if now's an okay time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Megan, you were saying how when you emailed, you would include your relevant courses that you've taken. Did you also include what grade you got? Like, is that appropriate to do, or?
I think I told him my GPA, and then I think he followed up and just asked for a copy of my unofficial transcript. But in the initial email, it was just my GPA and then some of the the highest level courses that would be relevant that I mentioned in there.
Okay, thank you. And then for Kevin, you were saying how you're doing work with the gut microbiome and immune system. Could you talk about what you're doing kind of day to day, like what techniques you use and stuff like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, and this is, if it were not obvious from how different Omid and my project is, this will be incredibly different from lab to lab. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of methods that Omid has probably never heard of, and then likewise, I will have never heard of any of the stuff that he's doing, but all of it's science. So I look at immune cells that I collect from mice using a technique called flow cytometry. You might have heard it. It's where you use antibodies to detect certain proteins on cells by running it through a machine that scans them with a laser, basically. And then it gives you information based on, like, these cells have this kind of protein called CD4. And then there's another one that has CD4 and CD44. And then that means that these cells behave differently than these cells. And you can do lots of colors at the same time and figure out what you're looking at. And then we have mice that are treated one way or treated another way, and we make some comparisons. I also do histology, and that is the microscopic like analysis of tissues. Since we do transplant surgeries, et cetera, we fix tissues in formaldehyde and then cut them very, very thin. And then we can stain them with various chemicals that show like the structure of the muscle fibers, or we can stain them with antibodies for specific immune cell types. So a lot of data is like counting immune cells that are in an artery. And so I spent many hours in front of a microscope with a counter. And then I also do a lot of bioinformatics stuff to analyze sequencing data. And day to day, I don't think I've ever had a week that's been the same. I think it's a lot of whack-a-mole. This thing needs to get done and I have time for it. Let's do it now. This needs to get written up. It needs to get done now. And so there's a lot of prioritization and whatnot. And it's tricky. Sometimes you have to be strategic about how you spend your time, like I was saying. Some things take longer to get done, but because they're lower priority, you can kind of push them aside, but you can't push them aside for too long. And I think that time management piece is something that you kind of learn implicitly through graduate studies, and every lab has a different way of prioritizing their time. Because you also apply for scholarships. You would normally apply to go to conferences. I guess there's digital ones now. You would attend seminars and workshops. And so there's a bunch of different things that are all kind of pulling you in different directions. But those are the kind of main experiments that I do.
Okay, cool. That sounds really interesting. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Okay, so another question here. Knowing that the field of research is tough in terms of salary and low on job opportunities, what pushes and motivates you to keep going down this path, and why research?
I can go first. I mean, that is a tough question, and that is like a question that will come into your mind like throughout your graduate degree a lot of times. And it's like field of research, especially as a grad student, you don't make a lot of money at all. Like you barely like gonna be making enough money to like pay for your rent and things like that. And it's tough. Like you can still like apply for scholarships, you can apply for grants and things like that to try to help you have more funding, but still really difficult, and it's going to be low getting paid. And like what keeps me going like for research is like this whole thing of like being able to find something that no one else has done before, or no one else has been able to like kind of like study this phenomena. But then also like keeping mind in the back of my head like what my long-term goals are, like what I would like to do, like how's this degree helping me getting the type of job that I want to get in a few years time. Like I know it sucks right now, well, like I'm not making any money, but like this research is helping me get where I want to get in 2 years. And I know like from the research that I've done, like I'm sure if you look into the area, the jobs that you like to do, you're going to see that like some areas in the industry is that a lot of people working in it, they have PhD or they have master degrees. And like a lot of times in like research and development, if you want to work in industry, you need to have a master or PhD. And that's kind of like what keeps me going and motivating me to do research.
Yeah, much the same. Having an overall goal is helpful. That goal will change over time, I think, as you encounter new information. But that is the story of science, is a story of delayed gratification, and I think that you'll need a certain amount of commitment for sure to make it through. Yeah, and it's I think the culture in science, or certainly at SFU, is becoming more aware of what kind of barriers that there are for people to enter research or to succeed. For example, MBB and BPK increased the minimum graduate student funding in the past year because they realized how low it was. Only after a student at one of their meetings was like, they asked the question at a meeting, hey, how do we support students better? And then a student at that meeting was like, the minimum pay kind of sucks. And so it led to MBB making a change, and then BPK made a change. And so that's great. And I say this like framing the PIs as bad guys. That's not true at all. I think that professors want people to succeed in general, and that there's just a lot of obstacles that they have as well. But that doesn't mean that the obstacles should then fall on their students. And so it's kind of a bit of negotiating all of that change as we go through these things. And I think right now, since I'm writing my thesis and I'm really close to being done, what motivates me is I want to be done. I want to leave. And I think that that motivation kicks in at some point for everybody. You're like, screw this, I hate everything. I just want to be done. And it reminds me of something that I had heard somebody say, and I think it's true, is that you start graduate school to finish graduate school. You don't start it to just hang out there. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes you make amazing friends, and you can't accelerate your project very much because, you know, random anecdote, your mice aren't breeding properly and it takes forever to get new supplies. But really, the idea is that this is a temporary period of your life and that you move on to the next thing. And I think having that helps get a little bit more energy here and then. That helps me do a late night, because the more hours that I put in now, the faster I finish. That being said, if shit happens, then shit happens, and things just take longer, and it's not about rushing through it as fast as you can. So your own priorities will kind of set your own pace, but I would definitely keep in mind that it's something that you start to finish. And afterwards, like, I have my own career goals, and I can talk about that, but I'm not sure that that's universally applicable. I think that what Omid was saying about your degree enabling you to have the career that you want, that is the big picture. How would a PhD enable you to do what you wanted to do? And for me, I knew from very early on, I wanted to lead research in a certain capacity. And then in master's degree, it is just kind of a different role that you fulfill in a workforce at a company, or even at a university, or something else. And those priorities are just as good and just as worthwhile. But yeah, I decided on my priorities, and that's what is getting me through.
Absolutely. So one comment in the chat, I want to start working and getting experience. Any general advice for that besides volunteer research or course credit research due to COVID? AKA, what can I do now, or what should I personally work on as of right now? So my big recommendation would be to work really hard in your courses and to build up those skills that you can build up right now, because we can't change COVID, unfortunately, as much as we'd all like to. So all you can do right now is work really hard in your courses, continue keeping your eyes open for those opportunities. Enrolling in co-op is a great way to do it, because you are able to do co-op in-person jobs right now. So if you're able to find a co-op lab that you can work in, a lot of them you are able to be in person and working on those technical skills. So that would be a really great way to start doing that right now. But other than that, that's kind of what you're able to do right now. I can see Omid is nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, yeah, that was a good like sum up of like what you could do. It really it sucks right now. You can't like just walk into labs and like get to know the research and things like that. Yeah, like I would recommend like trying to just try to do well in your courses, but at the same time, like try to like pick up like these skills that you would think you're going to need like later on. Like like it doesn't matter like if you're interested about research or you're trying to like do research, so and you end up doing something else after like master's or PhD. This like is a good time to like let you like build up those skills. Like try to like, I don't know, like if there's a software that you think you're going to need for later on for your research, or if you're going to need it for your when you get a job, like try to learn it now. Like this is a good opportunity. Like this is really, I know it like it sucks, but yeah, try to like just do well in classes and get to know your profs and things like that as well.
Hi, Omid. I have a question for you.
Sorry, before you go, Bismad, can I just tack one more thing onto
Yes.
that previous question?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. That being said, guys, this is good advice. This is what the sort of bedrock of your CV is made of. Right now, there are people who are not doing well because we're in a pandemic that has killed over 1 million people. Some of us have lost family, and other people are in really crappy situations, and the social isolation sucks. I'm the most unhappy that I've been for a very long time. But I am not functioning at 100% during this time, but I'm still trying to get stuff done. And I think that if you look back on this time and you go, oh crap, I got all B minuses in my courses. You had to deal with a pandemic, man. Like this is not easy. And I just wanted to say these things because I know that sometimes there are people who are not academically inclined. And like myself, there were some times where I got really discouraged when the solution to a lot of things was do better in your courses. That is true. That is absolutely true that doing better in your courses will make things easier. But if that does not happen, that doesn't mean that every door closes, right? So if you need to take care of yourself, also take care of yourself. Maybe it's a good time to revisit some of those priority questions that we were talking about. And then when you think you can, go for it and reach out to people. And maybe even reaching out to profs is just like, hey, I'm interested in research, but I just want to make sure that it's a career that I want to pursue. Do you think we could set up like an informational interview where I ask you stuff? Like that's also a good way to get in touch. You don't always have to be asking for studies or volunteer, et cetera. And then like Megan said, just be persistent. Unfortunately, there's no way around that one. But if you need to take time for yourself and to be introspective, then that is worthwhile as well.
Absolutely. Okay, Bismad, you had a question?
Yes. So I just wanted to ask, so Omid, after finishing your master's, what do you plan on doing as a career? Or is there more that you want to study?
Yeah, I think well, as a long-term career, I would like to like work in a research and development, like still like have some sort of research aspect into my day-to-day job. I like I kind of learned earlier on that I don't really want to stay in academia for for longer than I need to. So that kind of like narrowed it down for me a bit. But it's like and for me, like the job or like the goal that I would have, it could like change many times as like the opportunities come up and things like that. And it's like there's another tough question for me to answer before getting into job is like whether or not like I would want to make my master's into a PhD, or whether or not I would want to finish my master's and pursue another PhD. So I think it's kind of like it's difficult trying to like answer these kind of questions. And like as you get more and more specific on type of research you do, it's going to be kind of more difficult for you to actually find jobs. So like keep that in the back of your mind as well, because like when you do research that's super specific and like you're living in an area that there's not a lot of industry work that's in that kind of research, then you're going to have a hard time like finding jobs. So just kind of like keeping that in the back of your mind.
Sorry, I zoned out for a second reading something that Dr. Lamb posted, so he's being disruptive. Could you ask the question again so I can add a little bit more on?
I think the question was,
Thanks, Omid.
what are your like long-term goals, or like what kind of jobs you would like to have after?
Okay, so I'll add, yeah, Omid totally has it in that sometimes more education is like, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Absolutely. And I think the big thing in academia and our careers, I think there is a big difference between people who did their graduate degrees 10 or 15 years ago versus after the fact. Like there's a huge shift. It's just the population dynamics, the way that economies are, the way that the universities are mostly established now. We're going to have to pivot more often than our parents' generation, certainly. And that might mean changing fields of work. And sometimes with more education in one field, that makes it harder. Because you are maybe not used to learning about a different work culture, or you're not used to learning a completely new different set of skills. But that being said, it's still possible. You can still just do a postdoc in a completely different subject area. It means like you're going to have to work really freaking hard, but you can do it. If it's important to you, you'll find the energy to work hard. That is absolutely something that happens. And the other thing is about being strategic, in that sometimes if you're banking on a 1 in 20 chance of getting a position. So for example, medical school is an easy example because the information is very well like published and probably more widely known. So I'm going to use that. This could be any other program. If you can think of, I think it's like 1 in 20 applicants gets into the program. Maybe it's less than that. We're just going to say it's 1 in 20 for now. If your career plan goes, I'm going to do my undergrad degree and then I'm going to do a master's to get some research experience and to boost up my grades a little bit. And then I'm going to apply to medical school in the last year of my degree. And then I'm going to get in and then do my medical training, et cetera. You are planning on a 1 in 20 chance, regardless of how amazing and wonderful and supernaturally great you are in many areas. I think it's really important for you to understand that sometimes things don't work out and it has nothing to do with you. Megan, I'm sure I hope that is a thing that you've learned just about your research, that problem that you had, whatever it was. You're really smart. I'm sure that you're really, really smart and hardworking, and that thing just like wouldn't work for some reason. There's a gremlin in the lab that decided to pick a fight with you. And then that's also the case for applying for these kinds of opportunities, where things will not work out and it is completely out of your control. You can do a lot of work to like position yourself well. Good grades help. Enthusiastic work helps, research connections, all that kind of stuff. Knowing people, being a decent human being and friendly, that obviously helps a lot. But sometimes connections just don't get made in the way that you think that they are. And so thinking about other worthwhile ways for you to spend your time in your career would be helpful. And that doesn't mean that you're admitting defeat. It's
just to add on to that, if it doesn't go with your life plan, that's okay. Nobody really, I'm not going to say nobody, very few people end up where they thought they'd be when they started their undergraduate degree or when they finished their undergraduate degree. So it's okay. It's okay to take time. It's okay to not know what you want. That's all right. You'll get where you need to be if you work hard. You might not get where you thought you would be, but you'll get where you're going eventually, and it'll be okay. So don't put a lot of stress on this, especially due to COVID. It's okay that you aren't getting all these amazing opportunities right now. Nobody's getting all these amazing opportunities right now, unfortunately, and that's all right. And it's really important to just always remember that, because burnout happens. You don't need to put as much pressure on yourself as you think you do, for sure. So it looks like there's been a few questions in chat, but Gary and Ramneet have answered them. So just how can we get to know professors? But Gary said emailing, office hours, asking for informational chats, and just trying to reach out. But yeah, it looks like all the questions have been answered. If anyone else has questions, you are more than welcome to put them in the chat or unmute your microphone right now. We'll be here for a few more minutes, but yeah, if there's any other questions, let us know. But thanks for attending. I hope that you all learned something really interesting today. And I hope that this is helpful for you going into the future. And yeah.